pleasure to introduce Lacey Chabert, Cruz, Paula,
I'm just crashing the party as a fan.
I don't know if the audience noticed, but you guys were all sitting in the back watching. First thoughts that went through all your heads. What about you guys?
Matthew Fox and Scott Wolf are still hot.
Paula, I mean, that was especially emotional episode for you.
Yes.
I agree with that too.
I couldn't help
It's a very weird feeling. I haven't seen it so long. It's weird how much television has changed, isn't it? Like that guitar in the background, somebody sitting in the house, I wish that person would go away.
Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I read that the Party 5 that we saw wasn't exactly the series that they wanted you to make. They kind of brought some different ideas to you at first. How did you sort of shape it into, the Party 5 that you made it into?
Yeah, this is a story people may have heard before. Fox had come to us. Amy and I went in and pitched a different show. They said no to. I had no idea what it was. I don't remember what we were pitching them. And they were worried that 90210 was about to go off the air. It wasn't. Never going to go off the air. And they wanted a companion piece to 90210 that had a similar kind of tone. So they said, we'd love to do a show about kids without parents. And I think they kind of meant, don't tell the babysitter mom and dad are dead. Kind of thing. Kind of fun. We drive across the Golden Gate Bridge at 4 in the morning with the top down and have a really good time. And we thought that was a terrible, horrible, dinky idea. So Amy and I went back and thought, is there any way, we had nothing going on. It could be either that or go like work on Chicago Hope or something like that, which is a great show. But we knew we were just going to go on staff someplace, and this was our shot at getting a pilot done. So we had a tremendous incentive to try to figure something out. And we came back to it and said, well, what if we did this the way it might actually happen, closer to the truth of it, we should say, really go through the pain of kids who were losing their parents, who lost them. And amazingly, they said, okay, go. And the story is a long story after that about how it stayed on the air, but that's the beginning.
I mean, Lacey, you grew up on TV. What was it like for you being, almost the youngest on set compared to the baby? And how did you go through these awkward moments on TV and happening in real life?
Very awkward. Horrible, no. I mean, looking back as an adult now, I couldn't have asked for a better group of people to have gone through all of that with, for sure. We've been such a good influence. We genuinely love each other. I mean, that sounds so cliche, but it was just a joy to go and play with, this group of people every day. And just watching it today, it got me really emotional.
You had your first kiss on TV.
I had my first everything on TV, and it was generally my first time in real life, or it had yet to even happen. So it's pretty more, Bailey took me to, buy her pen at the grocery store. Started having fun. My train from. Those were just really awesome memories. The first time I engaged drunk, that's a whole other story not before the panel. But no, looking back, it was a really sweet time. Couldn't be more grateful.
At times, Bailey had to be the responsible one. What was that dynamic like, being the big brother that was really taking care of the family?
Well, I want to start by reiterating what Lacey said, which is there was a real affection we all had toward one another, and I think that, the show, the original design for the thing was really compelling. Obviously, a group of kids losing their parents and having to figure things out, and it was beautifully written, predominantly by Chris and Amy. All the way through, but I don't know that we would be, I'm still stopped, I've thankfully done a couple of other things, but I'm stopped all the time about Party of Five, and it's so resonant for the audience, and I think it has a lot to do with why you guys are here today. I think a lot of that had to do with, on top of the writing and it was shot beautifully. It was a great show, but there was a real connection and affection that the cast had for one another, and we just understood our characters, understood our relationships, and I really genuinely loved and thought of Lacey as kind of as like a sister, and so stepping in front of cameras and portraying that was sort of seamless and easy. But as far as Bailey goes, I mean, that was a brilliant kind of conceit as well, which is you take this, 16-year-old who's going through massive sort of upheaval and changes and trying to sort out who he is, and kind of put him in this position where he's sort of the most responsible person in the house. Is kind of nuts. Sort of like what Fox might have been after, but it's about the crime. It was really fun, I have to say, and I'm quite a bit older than I look. I'm 92 today. And so, had I not been, I wouldn't have gotten a chance to play a character who was in his teens and figuring things out that way. But it always allowed for some really sort of rich, great storytelling and relationships, because there was so much pressure on this young kid, and it was, he's a tragic figure in a way, because you knew he was just putting every ounce of himself into it, and he was not always going to win.
Chris, what was behind the decision? The kids had been through so much heartbreak to not have them get married in this episode and sort of start to have more of that family unit.
Well, television does not thrive on happiness. One of the problems with a show like this is that year after year after year, nothing goes right. I mean, we always say we Joe and nothing on these guys. Everything that could possibly happen then went off. But it was. This one louder. Oh, great, that's perfect. So it seemed like a natural. You need to. Everyone understands there was a requirement that you draw out the drama. But look, at the heart of all of this was that. It's sort of interesting, so it's going to be a little bit of a long story, I apologize, is that I think one of the things that we tried to do is to make sure that people had to pay for the emotional decisions they made. That is to say that it was right for Charlie to say, my whole life is planned out, I'm nervous about getting married. We could have had it all work out in the end and wrap up relatively easily, but part of I hope the honesty of the show is that he had to suffer for the fact that he went through that uncertainty. So, for example, Julia and Justin have sex. Get a terrible review in the New York Times. Do you remember this? Because they blasted us for allowing them to have sex and said it was wrong. We had this big fight in the New York Times. We wrote them back saying we would deal with this responsibly. Other shows do not. And we made Julia pregnant because of it, which is another story about what happened with Julia and the abortion episode and all of that stuff. But the whole idea was to not wrap up things easily. So it's too long to answer, but that's the idea, is make people make difficult decisions, but then force them to deal with the honest ramifications of the decisions.
She had an abortion.
She didn't have an abortion. She didn't have an abortion.
She did not. But I mean, the whole decision.
What do you work for the Times?
Well, speaking of, you did touch on really tough issues. How did you tread that line between playing them, respectfully and also not too over dramatically?
We failed. We went too far. I don't know. I think it's a struggle to make sure that you don't push too far. I think shows end up being parodies of themselves because they push harder and harder to top themselves. It's so easy for us to sit up here and be nice to each other because, first of all, we care about each other. But the truth is, a lot of that we owe to these guys. The honesty of whether it comes across as being melodramatic or truthful has to do with the way it's played. So.
But it was also, and I think we said this at the time, and it still kind of holds up watching it. It was groundbreaking in the sense that it took young characters seriously, and it gave all of their concerns and the way they would think and speak the same merit that adult characters had on television, and that hadn't really been seen all that much, even with other Fox shows where, it felt like, I don't know, a lot of the issues they were dealing with and the way they would speak to each other, the speed at which very big, chunks of life and story would go by for the sake of expedience on a television show. There was a patience and an honesty with the way that Chris and Amy created this show. And, later on, the alcoholism storyline with Bailey was a storyline that might have taken, at best 5 episodes on another series, especially a series with kids. It would probably be like 3. He drank, everyone was worried, he got better, and and our story lasted throughout an entire season, and even to a point where in the beginnings of it, people were, I remember, like, writer friends were getting in touch with you, like, I hope you're doing something with the drinking, because it doesn't look great. And it was that patient and honest, and that's a credit to the writing and Chris and Amy especially.
Wilson, you joined much later. What was it like coming in? Are you crying?
I'm just remembering when they confronted you, that episode was some of the best television I've ever seen. Yeah. Your performance was unbelievable, and your dimples are stupid.
What was it like coming into this family and getting to work with Scott?
Truly, like, it took about 2 episodes for me to go, stop looking at the dimples. First of all, they were incredibly welcoming. The fact that they were so warm to me that it's, I came in the last season and I worked a lot with Lacey and Scott, and I really loved the conversation we had about how do you talk to a young person about sexuality without talking about sex, right? Which is what the storyline was about. It's like, how do you talk about diversity and acceptance and respect? And I was talking to Lacey yesterday. My so-called life, I was a child, and I was learning what I was doing. But by the time I got on Party 5, I considered myself an actor. And Chris and Amy gave me some of the best material I've ever had the opportunity to work with. And I had a scene with Lacey where I talk about revealing that I had a child. First of all, how crazy is that? Like, only on television do you find out when you get a script, 3 weeks into playing a character that, oh, by the way, you have a child. Make it work. Cry about it. But one of my favorite, professional moments was that scene that you wrote for me in that monologue. And I have very, very fond memories. And I just remember being very welcome and feeling very much at home on that set. And very few shows, I don't know if you guys know this, would have allowed for that.
We're so happy to have you. As actors, what advice would you give to yourselves back then that you know now after doing 35 and all the other shows and movies in your careers?
Is this working? I think that when we started, we were all so very naive. Chris and Amy. And we kind of didn't know what we were doing, and it was kind of great that we didn't know what we were doing. But I think that we appreciated the fact that we knew that this was special. We didn't know what would happen with it, but I think we all appreciated the fact that this show doesn't happen all the time. And I think we all knew it, and so that's why it made it so special too. So because, it's a crapshoot.
What about you, Lacey? I mean, you've had such a long-running career.
No, I think I feel the same way I feel after every job, which is, gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. Or, I continue to feel like I'm learning so much and evolving and changing. I think along the lines of what Paula said, which is, as an actor, it's very difficult to get a pilot. It's very difficult to get a pilot that gets picked up. It's very difficult to get on a show that lasts and the network actually stands behind, and then to be on something that you believe in, as a creative person, is just such a gift. And I think we all knew that and appreciated it then, but looking back, I appreciate it even more. And to have a group of people, again, not to keep repeating myself, but that you genuinely love and care about and will carry through your life. It's not something that happens on every job that I've had.
It's been almost 20 years, actually, since it premiered.
Oh, yeah, you said that the other day. She goes, how do you feel about the 20th anniversary? And I was like, of what?
20 years.
So it was very hard, but are there any moments, just from filming or just hanging out on set, that stands out in your minds that you've carried with you today?
Okay.
Well,
Was there like a stuffed animal that was always placed somewhere? Do you remember what it was? Was it a dinosaur? Yes, but it was in every scene. Hold on, it was a green dinosaur.
no idea what you're talking
Inside joke, apparently. It's very inside.
Oh, that was the other show. Sorry.
I just remember Chris and Amy always told us tears would not be inappropriate. And then, obviously, and then at the last table read, they got us these silver tissue boxes and engraved on it. It said tears would not be inappropriate.
I still have it.
I still have it.
It's right by my bed. What? I think
Interestingly, the one moment that stands out in my mind more than any other, one just a littler one just jumped in, which was there was a really great moment where it was one of those things where just the commitment. Lacey was, it's crazy. It has been 20 years. She's like this incredibly beautiful woman, and she was this precious child, when we met. And but we had to do a scene where I can't remember why Thurber had to lick her face, right? It was Thanksgiving episode, I guess, and so there's just a scene where Lacey, all like 11 years old adorableness of her needed to have this bulldog lick her face in a shot, and he was like just this slobbery, stinky mess. Winston, was that his real name? Or is he sold? Maybe he's still living. Who knows? Strong dog. But so basically, they wound up. They couldn't. It's like Winston was just having a bad day and wasn't going to lick Lacey's face, and so they wound up like smearing ham juice all over Lacey's face.
Ham juice.
So, like, the commitment of Lacey, the early years was incredible and glamorous. But the moment that stands out for me more than any other was the very first moment after we were cast, and we were at Fox at the network, and we, it was kind of musical in and out and reading, and finally we stood in the hallway, and it was Chris and Amy and me and Lacey and Matthew and Nev. And we stood in this little circle, kind of looking at each other, and I don't know if it was you or Amy said, "Congratulations, you're the Salingers." And I remember looking around at these faces, and what was so sort of unique was I would have expected to be full of kind of excitement, yeah, but kind of apprehension of like, what is this going to be, and who is that person? And whoa, we're brother, sister. But it was the complete opposite of that. It was this utter calm and this knowing of, yes, we're the Salingers. This is meant to be. And so before we ever stepped on set and acted a scene, it was right. Somehow I sound like it was just, I don't know, right.
I remember discovering your show, and you were this big, and
Not that much taller now.
and I was introduced to all of you. Well, I already knew who you were, but I was introduced to the rest of you through that show as actors. And I'm thinking how, like, when I saw Matthew Cox on Lost, he was the oldest brother for the first season of that. I'm like, what is he doing on the island? And I'm wondering if I really couldn't shake it, not to dismiss the job because I'm doing that show, but did any of you find that was hard for you in whatever you did next, and maybe from your audience or your peers, or I don't know what that's like when you do such a pivotal role? How does that go on?
I think it can be a gift and a curse. Yeah, not a curse. That's a very strong word, but a challenge exactly to overcome, because especially when you're in a living room, these are intimate and personal, and I feel like people really do identify you with that character that you played for so long that sometimes people have a hard time seeing you as something else. But as time goes on, and with any role that you do is well received, or people notice it, you're kind of stuck in their mind as that until you do something else and create something else. But I definitely think those first things.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a gift to be able to play a role that is kind of indelible to the audience that loves it and loves the show. But yeah, for me, I think the biggest surprise was how sort of challenging the transition it was for me. You know, there's obviously this sense of like hoping that the audience is going to be able to travel along with you and see you as different people and not wonder like why Charlie's trapped on an island. Charlie couldn't have played Crush. But I think it's easy to underestimate the influence that 6 intense years on a series playing a particular character with a group of people has on you as an actor, and so I found myself having to kind of shake free of some of those things as much as I was hoping the audience was able to.
I just want to clarify, I didn't mean a curse in a bad way. It was definitely an amazing blessing and honor, but it's definitely a challenge, and I think that's kind of part of the excitement of what you do. You're always trying to recreate yourself. You know, like Scott says, to yourself in a different way also.
You also have to change where you go. You know what I mean? So, I don't know.
It's like a horrifying live-action yearbook. Oh, that's where that was our really awkward long art stage. Oh, that's where my teeth were extra big. Oh, right, I forgot about those years.
It's a problem that I would love to have. I'm listening to you guys, and I can't help but, be so thrilled for you and having that problem because, we stuck. My so-called N45 started at the same season, and we got canceled. And how fantastic is it to like sit here and go, oh, people know me as, Bailey for 6 years, and I'm like, thank you.
I think people know you as Ricky as well.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Any more questions from the audience?
Hi. I just wanted to say that I think it was 8th grade, they played in our health class the episode where they had the intervention. Like that was what they showed us in health class to kind of bring up the subject, which was in many ways cool. Because I was like, yay, I love 35. But on the other hand, like, wow, you're showing that to middle schoolers. It's probably not as appropriate. But I just wanted to say, how do you feel about having that be brought up as the topic and how do you approach that, and you're actually educating children and adults about that topic?
But we took that seriously, and I don't know that it was not a manual for how to deal with substance abuse, and so I'd be nervous about that. But I think we were very proud of the way that we handled it. I remember, by the way, and this was a big issue for me, it had nothing to do with that. I remember we did your story about depression, and you and Matthew went on a talk show to talk about depression, and I thought, what are they doing on a talk show? They just read the lines. Doctors? So it's a little weird in the way in which that happens. Here's the thing, I think that the show, our show, My So-Called Life, which did this incredibly well as well, and by the way, we loved that show. It just made people talk about these things. We were not looking to be the answer to anything. We were looking to be a way for parents and kids, or parents or adults to speak to each other about subjects that they might not know what to talk about. And the thing that made us happiest was the evidence that came back that the show triggered more family dinners, more family conversations about all sorts of topics than anything else. Whether it ought to be shown as a piece of medical literature, I don't know. No, of course you didn't.
it did touch people in a lot of ways. And when Matthew and I did that thing, pretending that we were young, it was in San Francisco, and we were on the stage like this, and this young man, about 17 years old, came by, and he handed me a piece of paper, and he said, he helped save my life. And I got home, I got back to the hotel, and I hadn't read it, and it was a letter. It wasn't finished. So I guess he brought it, but it just basically said that because of watching what you guys wrote for my character, that he went and got help, and he actually almost tried to commit suicide, but he went and got the proper meds, and so, you know, that's a big thing.
Right there?
Scott, the next show that you were on as a series regular was Everwood, which was really well written as well, and very important family show, and touched a lot of issues. Was that a coincidence? How did that come about?
Coincidence in the sense that I wasn't sort of telling my agents I'm only open to, you know, informative, youthful shows. But not a coincidence that it was well written, because that's what I was sort of weaned on. Is that the right expression for it? There's something happens when your first kind of big break and chance to work is something where characters and words are so well cared for that it does set the bar high. And so I found myself reading a lot of things post-Party of Five where it was just sort of like, you know, not so much, you know, you know, it was working with Greg Berlanti's a great writer, and it was a lovely cast and a great show, and so I was proud to jump in there and join them. And it did mean something to me to, I felt like not only, primarily for myself, just in terms of how I could go act and work and be, but also I wanted to uphold this kind of standard somehow that I had set for myself, and how I wanted to sort of be seen. You know, as somebody who takes to heart the kind of show and kind of story I'm throwing myself into, and that's a product of how great this experience was. You know, Party of Five was so. It literally, I used to say, you know, like the day the new scripts came out was like Christmas morning, and. Yeah. You just could, like, you'd see them in a manila envelope on the table in your trailer, and it was like your heart started racing. Like, I can't wait to read what comes next, you know. And so, you know, it happened sort of just like a lot of other things happen for an actor, where it's sort of an opportunity comes up and you move toward it, and if you like it, and it just so happened that they picked me for it. But throughout my career, up until now and moving forward, the standard that was set with this show will always be with me, and will always inform the choices I make.
Going off of that, I mean, Lacey, I have to bring up Mean Girls. Was that were you looking for maybe an anti-Claudia role, or just something that showed you in a different light?
No, I mean, I was just looking for a role. It was just an audition I had, and I thought it was really funny, and I thought Tina Fey was so incredibly talented and funny. And it was something that they really, the way that the character was described physically, it just wasn't me, and they really didn't think I was right for it. So they didn't see me for a while, and I read the script and I was like, oh, I really, really like this. I'll put myself on tape or whatever. And finally, Marcy Vera, who's become a good friend to the cast director, she saw me, and you know, it worked out. And it was so much fun. I mean, that was something I definitely, you know, will remember forever. That was a great role.
So overall, the seasons of the show, you all had to, you know, act out a lot of very dramatic situations. Is there one scene that stands out in your memory as the hardest to perform? Or?
I remember scenes where we would start laughing, and that was just it. I could not hold it together, especially you and I feel like. And once that started, that always made a dramatic scene difficult.
Well, I mean, one of the most demanding, you know, the intervention episode came up, and so for me, I think one of the most demanding, not just scenes, but episodes was that episode. And there was one particular scene, I don't know if you remember this, but there's, yeah, probably do. It's basically this big scene where Bailey's just pleading for his freedom and for them to just stop what they're doing. And it's all obviously coming from a sickness, a disease, but it was such an important moment, I felt like, for the character, and it was one of those scenes, it wasn't just like, breezing through, grabbing, milk from the fridge and, saying good morning to somebody. It was obviously an important, heavy scene, and so it's difficult not to, I think from an acting standpoint, put too much pressure on it. You don't want to make it precious, and it's try and treat it like any other scene. But on the day, we were doing it, and that sort of unfortunate thing that comes up, which is just, wanting to just do it great, wanting it to be everything, just kind of can squeeze it and not allow it to be what it might be otherwise. So we're doing the scene, and a guy named Steve Robyn, who was one of our what would you call him, producing directors, and he directed a bunch of episodes every year. Loveliest guy, and theater director, and an actor's director, and wonderful guy. And he kept on meeting me in the kitchen, because Bailey would kind of exit into the kitchen, so I kept on going back there, and I felt like I was kind of finding my way towards something, and finally he came back and he said, "Buddy, I think we got it. It's beautiful. It's there. It's But everyone knew that the other thing hadn't happened, and the prospect of moving past that without having it been allowed to live how it maybe should have was so heartbreaking to me that I just cried. I just fell down and started crying. And he picked me up and he wiped my face off. And he was like, "Roll camera," and he was going back in. And so the tape that people see in the show was that next take. And so that sort of has always stood in my mind as, kind of a lesson on how to hope to approach this sorts of scenes moving forward, but just kind of one of those seminal moments from an acting standpoint. And my dimples looked great in that.
So for me, I get to watch all of these things. Sometimes standing on the set, I'm crying a little bit, which is very embarrassing. Yeah, I've always said, "I cannot believe you're crying at your own work." Is it for her and me? But there are a couple of scenes that stand out. Everything that Scott did in the intervention episode, that scene is the most remarkable. Lacey also has a scene at the end where she says, "I love you the best," which is a pretty amazing scene. You saw some of Paula's stuff here, and also the episode where she needs to come to Charlie and says she can't have a child. There's also a scene at the end of the first season after Bailey's girlfriend dies, and Charlie and Bailey are in the backyard together. It's actually the second time anyone says "I love you" on the show. But I have to, because Matthew's not here, say that probably, I think you'll be okay with me saying this, even though the intervention is my favorite episode. The seminal moment of the series that got the show picked up was Matthew in the Thanksgiving episode where he confronts the drunk driver who killed the parents, which he did in a single take because we were running out of time and the camera ran out. And I think I remember going to at some point I was at something one day with a critic who said to me, "I never watched your show, no one was watching your show." And at some point, I flipped by and I saw this kid do this scene, and I never missed another scene. So if you ever watch another episode, they're all unbelievable. Everyone has kind of a big moment in that. So your scene with the drunk driver is pretty incredible as well, so is Neff's. But Matthew's is unbelievable.
Last question?
You guys dealt with a lot of kind of heavy material on set. How did you keep the set lighthearted after? It seems like it could be very emotionally draining to do.
Drugs.
Our secret's out. I mean, I think it's typical, like any show where what you see on camera is very dramatic and emotional. It tends to be the most sort of the yuckiest. I don't mean yucky like gross. I mean like yuck, like funny, joking around set. I mean, it was easy to stay lighthearted because we enjoyed each other
yeah, it's really like a job. It's pretty much just having fun. I mean, it was hard work and pour your heart and soul into it, especially when it's really dramatic storylines. But I feel like it was like, for me, I mean, maybe it's just because I was a kid, but it was like a really long summer camp for 9 months out of the year every year. So it was completely devastating when it ended also. but it was something very, very special.
It's the opposite of the way people think. I mean, you know, comedians are often depressed and sad people, but our writer's room and the fact that we do dramatic stuff has nothing to do with the fundamental, you know, personality of the people who do it.
No, and I think even watching this, I think this was a perfect example of how, yes, there's a lot of emotion and incredibly turbulent stuff going on at times, but there's such a warmth to it, and there's such a hopefulness behind it all. And really funny moments too. I mean, like, you know, when Will punches Bailey in the stomach, it's just unexpected, and you need a laugh in that moment, and they gave it to you. But
I want to say one thing. It's just totally random, off subject, but I remember at the Golden Globes, the clip that they showed the year that we won the Golden Globe was that end scene in the house where we're staking the cake. And it just brought back all of those memories of all of us standing there on this stage. I think I was about 13. I was wearing like a tuxedo for some reason. I don't know why. It was really small. But I just remember standing there and just being completely overwhelmed. And we were all crying and laughing. And it was just so awesome to have that moment. And, you know, and you guys were kind enough to make sure that we all got our own Golden Globe statue, which I still have sitting in my room. And they just kind of brought up. You got to pay it. Paying every day. But I just brought it up.
Your guys' panel was so much longer. You had a panel.
What else do you want to say? What else do you want to say?
They're just up, like, against the wall. They're like, go ahead, you can cancel.
Do you want to answer a question I can ask?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, tell me what it's like working on your set versus working on this set.
Great question.
Less eyeliner. Wow, that is a good question with the differences. You know, Ricky was, Ricky was kind of, you know, this very like flamboyant person who was trying to find himself, and Victor was this person who knew who he was, right? Like he knew exactly who he was. He lived in his skin. He had great confidence, and they're completely different people in our brains to me. So they're completely different experiences. I will say this about Party 5, because someone asked. I'll ask you the question before, like a hard scene to do. Someone says to you, "Hey, it's Thanksgiving. Sing a song." On TV, like in a scene, like make that work. Like nobody sings in real life. Remember, like I actually sang at Thanksgiving, and I was thinking to myself in that scene, going, "How do I make this honest and real? It doesn't seem like I'm doing a scene from Latasha Poe." But it was great. It ended up being really great, I think.
It's really great. Yeah, I sing in an Oliver episode. Right? And I played violin a lot.
I do have a moment with you when you were like, when you tried to fix me up with Mitchell. And I was like, oh, because he's the only other gay person in San Francisco.